Hello, everyone. We're just going to start by doing a quick sound test to make sure that everybody can hear this okay. So any feedback is appreciated. If you could just send messages on the platform to let us know if you can hear us all good, that would be great, just so that we know how it's going. Wonderful. I'm already getting your messages. Thank you, guys. Beautiful. Okay. So welcome everyone to New Energy Updates Operations and Maintenance webinar for PV executives. We are doing this in partnership with Duke Energy and NG. My name is Diana Droppel, and I will be your webinar host for this morning. Okay, so before we start, I will tell you just a few words about New Energy Update and, of course, the purpose of this webinar for those of you who actually haven't heard of us before. So who is New Energy Update? We are an organization that helps renewable energy executives sort of anticipate the future and try to formulate effective plans in the face of what is constant change, right? So we have a few ways of doing this, but generally we figure out how to do this through independent market research, international conferences, and so on and so forth. So topically in solar operations and maintenance, we deliver webinars, reports, and white papers that are meant to provide you with valuable content that you can hopefully use to stay ahead of all these changes, right? That have a direct impact on your performance, on your production, and all the things that really matter to you. Okay, so, well, in this webinar, we will focus on how to improve your PV operations and maintenance strategies, specifically to enhance your cash flow, right? And keep in mind, we're always looking for collaborators, so feel free to reach out to me after the webinar if you're interested to start a conversation. So why are we here? Why are you all attending this webinar? Why do we have these wonderful speakers? Well, put simply, the costs to produce solar power are declining very, very fast, and that makes it very difficult for owner-operators to attract investment. So with all this financial pressure falling on operations and maintenance executives, it's really necessary now to redefine both strategy and execution, which is a really tough one, we know. So that's why we are really excited to partner with Robert Morris from NG and Josh Rogers from Duke Energy, who will give you practical advice on how to do this. In short, they are looking to cover the following topics. First of all, how to carry the quality of operations and maintenance execution, especially in times of cost crisis and reduced budgets, which is what we're experiencing now. How to mitigate risk and meet the timeline of your agreements, maximize productivity. Very importantly, how to ensure long-term stability to increase investment appetite, right? So to predict the future accurately, to try to be competitive in pricing a solar power purchase agreement, and also on the execution side. And ultimately, and I would say very, very importantly, how to make the most of really lucrative solar PV markets in order to drive higher revenues. Yep, so all the good things. Remember that you can send in your questions at any time for our Q&A. Also, if you have any technical problems, just drop me, the organizer on the platform, a message directly. And we really encourage any comments or feedback through the platform. So just keep feeding anything through as questions, right? So we will be able to see them. That's it for me for now. Thanks to everybody in advance. I hope you enjoy it. And over to you, Rob, to take us all away.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Second here, I'm waiting for that. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Excellent. As Diana mentioned, my name is Rob Morris, and I work for NG. I'm responsible for maintaining the solar operations on the western half of the United States. The territories that I cover primarily are California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Texas, Nebraska and New Mexico is where we have our sites currently. Our time is short, so I'm just going to jump right into this. And no matter what you do when you're in O&M, there's always a massive amount of pressure to reduce the cost while you maintain the system. And I see this as kind of a balancing act. You have to consider safety, which is crucial. You want people on the site to be safe. You want the property to be safe. You don't want any major losses. You also want reliability so that you get the production levels as you always planned, minimize downtime, minimize service calls, parts replacements, and of course, minimize the crises that come up. Crises typically cost money. And then, of course, keeping production as high as possible, up to at least the levels as planned. And reliability and production are closely intertwined. And like I mentioned, it's always a balancing act. So you want to balance the risks associated with all of these things versus the costs. I can always minimize the risk, but then I maximize the cost, or I can minimize the cost and maximize the risks, minimize, vice versa. The balancing act is to find a happy middle ground on this so that you can have cost-effective O&M. Early decisions really do affect what's going to happen in the life of the project. The early decisions really can improve the long-term success of any project. You want to design it properly or fix it properly at the beginning of your O&M operations so that you don't have 20 to 30 years worth of headaches. So you start with a good design. A really important step after this is quality control of installation, or if this is a site that's just being handed over to you as you're an O&M provider only, then you need to do quality control at that point too, to know what you're getting into. And I'll talk about that a bit more. Planned annual maintenance really helps with avoiding crises, and it does reduce your truck rolls and your costs for unplanned maintenance. You need ongoing monitoring so you can see what's going on with the system to know if you do have any problems. And then, of course, your reactive maintenance needs to be done intelligently and not just blindly send people out when you think you have a problem. The key to all of this is have a plan right from the very beginning. So as I mentioned, start with a good design or be able to identify a good design. So if you have any control over the design and the construction, that gives you a big plus on the O&M because you can really help to reduce costs. If you don't, you need to look at the site before you take it over and know what you're getting into. One of the keys, learn from your past mistakes. Learn from past mistakes on any given system. Learn from past mistakes on your other systems. Designing for reliability, I think, is crucial, and it's something that gets lost a lot nowadays. I like the expression, cheap can be expensive. So you can save $1 at the beginning and spend $10 a year for the life of the project because you saved a little money up front. You also have to design for repairability. You want to be able to troubleshoot. Ideally remotely, if you can do that, you can save some truck rolls, getting things fixed right the first time you send somebody out there. You want to work on making sure you have replacement parts, use standard parts, and bankable companies, because if a company is not in business later on when you need maintenance, you're going to have problems if you can't find a direct replacement, and typically the costs start to go up when you do that. And this is a tough problem nowadays with some inverter manufacturers. And lastly, design for good remote monitoring. The reason for this is you want visibility to what's going on at the site at all times. It can give you a heads up when there starts to be trouble, and you can head off problems before they grow into bigger problems. The quality control at installation or when it's handed over to an O&M maintenance group, I think one of the most important things is actually the on-site review. Contractors are usually a lot more careful if they know their work will be reviewed, and nobody likes rework. The contractors don't, the owners don't, the O&M provider doesn't. It just causes problems for everyone. Another thing you can do at the beginning is do aerial thermal imaging. You can see a lot of array problems that are difficult to diagnose and fix ahead of time. You can find a lot of problems with strings, with modules, or with cells. Really important in this is create a site review system. Find some process and follow it. Make sure you document everything. This way you know what's going on, and it's easy to communicate the status of the system when you took it over, and it'll be easier to work with your owner, or if you're the owner, to work with your contractors because you know where you started. If you can get feedback to the designers, if you have that option, We found this to be really helpful to show what's in the drawings that's unclear, what's wrong, or what's just poorly designed and could be better designed in the drawings so that the next system works better and is built better for O&M. Something else that I think gets lost a lot of the times is building a relationship of trust with your contractors. This is really important. I think you need to be fair, you need to be tough, and you need to manage expectations. And the reason I say this is if you can do these things, your contractors know that you're going to be fair and you're not going to try to take advantage of them. They're a lot more likely to help you. And I've had this happen in a number of situations where my contractors have, taken care of us when we need them to on some minor things, maybe going out to a site for something minor and not charging us. And on the other side, when something takes longer than you initially expected, but there's a good reason for it, I don't mind paying them for the extra hours. So it works out and it goes both ways. So I think having that good relationship benefits everyone. Ongoing monitoring is crucial. You want to minimize your repair costs. First thing I think of for monitoring is you want to be able to diagnose issues remotely. I call it pre-diagnosing it. This way, when you have a good idea of what the problem is or where the problem is, you can send out the right technicians, you can send out the right parts ahead of time. This avoids the second, third, fourth truck roll by having a good idea of what they're getting into so that when the technician goes out there, they know what to expect and they can fix it the very first time. So it lowers your troubleshooting hours, it lowers your truck roll costs, and it helps you decide sometimes you may not need a truck roll. Let's say it's a minor problem, a communications problem only, but the system is producing. It can probably wait until next time somebody goes out there for a more significant problem or next time you have your annual inspection. So ongoing monitoring. I think the key here is focus on what's important. For me, it's production. And I think production is really the only thing that counts. I know not everybody agrees with this point of view, and I've heard definitely opposing viewpoints. But my point of view is owners are typically paid for the kilowatt hours generated. They're not paid for uptime. They're not paid for any other metric, with some exceptions. O&M providers understand they need a simple metric to show success, and this can be difficult, and this is why people don't always like the measurement or the metric of kilowatt hours generated, because then you start getting into difficulties in the contract. However, I don't think just because it's difficult, that's a good reason to avoid it. I think it's a good reason to dig into it and figure out a way to make it work. One thing we've done is we'll use PV models for the first year, and then after that, you can look at historical data. You can look at the last 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and use a rolling average. And of course, you have to weather adjust it year to year, but there's weather data out there, and if you have a weather station on your site, you have pretty good weather data. The key here is, I think, look at it over a longer period of time, because if you look at it day to day, you might have days that are low, you might have weeks that are low, you might have had some fault in the system that took a while to get fixed. But on average, it'll average out and the system will show good production, even though you're going to have those short periods of downtime. And I think that's just normal, and everybody in O&M knows that's how it goes. Planned annual maintenance, another very important part. You want to make fixes and identify problems before they become a crisis. You definitely want to plan ahead of time. So there's a common theme in all of this. Have a plan, have a plan, have a plan. Plan for what's going to be inspected and what your criteria is going to be for those inspections. Some common things where I see problems are AC and DC connections, making sure things are torqued, make sure they're installed properly, cabling, damage to cables, looking at modules for damage, the mounting system and or the tracking system, breakers, fuses, all of these things need to be looked at on an annual basis, and you can avoid a lot of problems. And you can see some in these pictures, there's a few failures here that would have been nice to avoid ahead of time. Your findings from the inspection, they've got to be actionable. You have to be able to do something about it. And so part of that is you need timely reports. And what we've done is we have a phone application or a tablet application that the technician goes through and takes pictures, writes comments, and is led through the entire inspection. So this is part of the plan. And then at the end of it, They hit submit, and we get a PDF report and an Excel spreadsheet that tells us everything that is going on at that system, what was good and what was bad, what needs to be fixed still. You need a service case system to track all these needed repairs. So if it can't be fixed on site right then during the inspection, you need a way to be able to keep track of them, because after a while it gets out of hand. And if you don't have a system to keep track of this, things are going to fall through the cracks. Then you close the service cases when they're fixed and verify that they're working. Again, aerial thermal imaging, I'm starting to see the value in that, and you can find array problems very early on. You can look for hot spots and see issues and look for systemic module problems. Lastly, you can make simple repairs during annual inspection. If it's something like a cable needs to be torqued down and it hasn't been damaged, or a breaker needs to be retorqued, things like that, you can fix it. Simple fuse replacements on DC strings, again, it avoids future truck rolls. Then intelligent reactive maintenance. I think the key here is not to send a truck out every time you see any little minor problem. And what I typically do is I do a quick cost-benefit analysis. It doesn't have to be anything extensive. It doesn't have to be an 18-page report or anything like that. Just look at what the truck roll cost is going to be, and what you think the number of hours and times your production or times your contractor's rate on fixing these, and decide how much production is going to be saved by making that fix versus what it's going to cost you to fix it. And if it's something really minor, like let's say one string is out, it's probably not worth sending somebody out there just for that. But if half your inverters are out, you need to get somebody out there right away. And also, you try to group repairs together when a technician is in the site or in a specific area. And lastly, one of the things where the cost-benefit analysis for me goes out the window is if I'm concerned that there's a safety problem. So if there's a potential for damage to people, buildings, equipment, anything, I send a technician out right away. I think it's just the responsible thing to do. So to wrap up here, minimizing your O&M costs. I think the key to start is have a plan. Just like so many things in life, it'll save you a lot of hassle. If you know what you're going to do, your technicians know what you do, your co-workers know how you're going to react to things, everything just works much more smoothly. So again, start with a good design if you can. If you don't have an option to have any input on the design, be able to identify a good design from a bad one. And if there's problems with the design and you're considering signing an O&M contract, make sure that gets put into the contract, that those things need to be fixed, or make exclusions so that you're not left holding the bag with a very expensive fix for something that was done by the installer, the original installer. Resolve your known problems prior to accepting a new system. This is whether it's your own system within your own company, do a thorough site review. And if you're accepting someone else's system for an O&M contract, again, review it thoroughly and know what you're getting into. Choose your key performance indicators and focus on what's important. You have to decide that for yourself. For me, it's production. It's kilowatt hours generated. Then monitor what's important and react to it intelligently. Have your annual inspections, avoid crises. You can see small problems before they turn into big problems. Like, let's say a loose cable connection could potentially start a fire somewhere. If you catch it early on, you may have to replace a connector or a cable, but it's a lot less expensive. And then lastly, do intelligent, unplanned maintenance. Minimize your truck rolls and minimize your repair costs. I think nowadays everybody is trying to save as much money as possible. So I think the better plan you have ahead of time, the more you can do with a limited amount of money. So I want to thank everyone. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll try to answer as many as I can.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was excellent. We do have some questions coming through, so thank you very much, everyone, for sending them over. And I just wanted to let you know that there will be some time at the end, once both the panelists are done with their presentations, when we will cover these questions. So keep sending them through, and any comments, of course. I've seen a few of you asking if they will receive the recordings or the presentations afterwards, and I'd like to confirm that these presentations will be sent. So the webinar is being recorded, and you will get these recordings after the webinar has taken place. Okay, well, I would now like to introduce you to our second panelist, Josh Rogers from Duke Energy, who is going to present the thoughts that he has on a different presentation. So we will now send a notification to him so he can share his screen. So bear with us, please. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Josh, over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. Great job, Rob. Truly, O&M is a balancing act. I really liked your comments on the design being ideal, having some inputs there to the construction teams of the design and engineering firms. But as we know on the O&M side, that's not usually the case, and a lot of times we are acquiring some older assets. So great job on covering that. And so what I'll talk about is just kind of compound on some of the things that Rob mentioned. Also provide some insights into Duke Energy and our strategy as well. So first things first, just a quick overview on our business segments. So I'm the director of solar operations for the commercial business. We operate across the U.S. in approximately 11 states, but we also have a regulated utility portion that feeds our regulated customers. And essentially we've got nuclear, coal, natural gas, hydro, combined cycle, and then we've also got solar that's being developed in those regions as well. So that's a separate group. Within the commercial business, we also have a commercial transmission and pipeline, and then we also have an industrial and commercial portfolio under the REC Solar acquisition. Just a rundown on where our site's currently. So the Duke Energy Renewable Team, we're an important growth portion for Duke Energy as a regulated utility. We've got sites, as you can see, in California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, New York, down in the Southeast and Florida as well. And then obviously our stronghold is in North Carolina. Keeping in mind that we also, within the renewables group, operate wind and battery sites as well, so those are shown on the screen. Just looking at our assets, we're talking about, the reducing costs and ensuring that, we maximize the financial benefit of these sites over the long term. So one thing I just wanted to mention is, at Duke Energy, we've got over 17 solar facilities now, and that number continues to grow each year and each month with out-of-warranty equipment. Right now we've got greater than 200 inverters that are out of warranty, 8 tracker systems, 19 module manufacturers, 10 substations. And once again, our solar sites today operate in 11 different jurisdictions. So our preference in Duke Energy is to self-operate our asset. So that means Duke Energy owns the asset. We also perform the O&M. We do have third-party operated sites, and so we're not opposed to that. We usually do an internal decision analysis based on safety, cost, reliability, and overall project reputation in determining whether we self-operate or use a third party. So one thing that's important when we're self-operating, and any company that is self-operating, one of the biggest things you can do is training and retention of your technicians. So it's an ever-growing industry. There's a ton of opportunities out there. Getting technicians familiar, trained, and comfortable with a site really can have major impacts on the performance of that site. What happens with just the growing industry in the U.S. is technicians get somewhere, they learn some skills, they learn the site, and then they get an opportunity elsewhere. And then a lot of that, knowledge and experience is then lost. You're trying to backfill that position. So what we do at Duke Energy is we do spend a lot of time focusing on training our technicians. We've got 4 technician levels with a lead technician as well. We spend 3 weeks in initial training and team building activities to really get them part of the group, get them familiar with the Duke Energy processes, procedures, and policies. And then on average, and this is usually a minimum, but about 40 hours of training and development. And that includes training with OEM manufacturers for inverters, training on infrared scans for drone inspections. We also spend a lot of time training on pad mount transformers and substation equipment as well. So each employee really controls their own destiny. Obviously, each team, we evaluate the needs of the team and the needs of the business and try to develop that accordingly. So really that's if you're self-operating. Coming from a training background myself, I think that was important. I really threw that in there first because I think that's where a lot of the O&M struggles are on the O&M side, is just retention, training, and getting quality output in the field. But moving on into whether you're self-operating or third party, these are some good questions and great things to consider whether you're self-operating or using third-party operations. Proactive versus reactive maintenance approaches. There is, a good portion of the industry that looks at, solar sites based on size or capacity or PPA rate, and they look at it as more of a reactive, where they're doing the minimums, and in turn, they're making larger repairs. What happens here is you're seeing higher downtime during production hours, expensive repair costs to mobilize quickly, and then parts availability really impacts that. So I think Rob kind of mentioned that, minimizing the crises that come up. If you have a reactive maintenance approach where you're doing the minimums, you're not doing a lot of proactive work, then you are going to see potentially some spikes in your O&M cost just based on, the downtime of the site or anything that you're not catching through your performance engineering or your data analytics. On the proactive side, using that data analytics that Rob mentioned, but also using some seasoned work management principles, meaning bundling work, really looking at the cost-benefit analysis. One thing that Rob already mentioned was the actionable findings. Right? If you know that you've got an underperformance or you've got an issue, taking that into a work order or something that can be acted on quickly and efficiently is important to keep your costs low. Anytime the sun's up, when you've got underperformance or equipment down or strings down, you are going to be losing revenue. So at the end of the day, if you've got a third party, usually third parties are going to have availability guarantees, meaning if the inverter's up, they're covered. So keeping in mind that overall revenue perspective. Regional preventive maintenance and seasonal preventive maintenance. Essentially customizing your strategies based on the region, the site, and the equipment. And then lastly, using predictive machine learning, so AI tools. So Rob already mentioned the database or maintenance management systems to manage all your service work orders or your service tickets. Not only to manage the open tickets, but also to use that historicals and essentially data mine where you need to focus your efforts, where you can get more proactive in lowering those costs, especially as portfolios grow throughout the U.S. On proactive measures, one of the things that a lot of times does get overlooked is, wire management strategies. One, considering products that last based on the region. There is a ton of solar sites out there that see a fair amount of ground faults, small fires, small issues within sites just based on poor wire management practices. And this is something to where construction a lot of times is going through and doing this very quickly. It often gets overlooked on the quality or the review or the turnover process because usually it looks good. And then 2, 3, 5 years into the project, you essentially have systemic wire management problems. What happens here is then, with the growing number of solar sites, there is a growing amount of risk. We've already discussed the risk associated with growing portfolios. Wildfire management plans are important based on this risk. Just recently in California, major wildfires took a major financial toll on one of the largest utilities out there, and we're seeing that across the world in places like Australia, South America, and different regions where wildfires continue to be an issue. So one thing that I'm concerned of managing a large portfolio of solar sites is just that concern that we're going to be identified as a cause for a much larger wildfire. So in that proactive wire management strategy, something that's not mentioned or thrown on this slide is vegetation management, making sure that you've got a great vegetation management plan to ensure that wildfire is contained if you were to have a fault. Another topic that Rob hit on, and I'm just going to go into a little bit more, is the use of predictive maintenance practices. So I think technology is advancing very quickly in many ways. Here at Duke Energy, we're doing a lot of stuff with drone analytics and IR imaging to essentially fly over these sites, minimize some of our on-the-ground maintenance time, and get actionable maintenance items to go in and increase our energy yield and production from the site. So essentially, what you're doing here is flying a drone is a lot less invasive than an IV curve trace or getting into combiner boxes or walking the field and doing amp clamp measurements throughout all of your strings. So this is a great, quick way to really see the DC health of the site, get some quick actionable items. And like I said, while the sun's up, if you can take action on those and restore your energy yield, you're obviously going to produce more revenue at the end of the day. Other things to keep in mind when looking at the overall longevity and finances of the site is the sourcing strategies for parts and equipment. Manufacturers are changing, going in and out of business, new ones are popping up. Essentially, having cost-effective repair parts ready is important. So evaluating your inventory management process, looking at how you can source larger amounts from inverter manufacturers or third-party suppliers. There are also several third-party vendors that are popping up to repair damaged equipment as well. So a lot of that has to be considered, and essentially leveraging your own buying power to establish a one-stop shop for increased savings and quick deliveries. So it's just going to help minimize your downtime, and once again, that'll just increase the revenue that you'll see across your sites. Another thing that can be a major ticket item for the long term of these sites is repower strategies. Here in the U.S., we're not really seeing a lot of repowers to date. However, there is several discussions around that. Really, you have to evaluate your inverter replacement options, whether it's string or centralized inverters. There's also the difference between 600 volt, 1000 volt, and 1500 volt that could complicate that or add additional costs. Key reasons to evaluate the replacement options, obviously the inverters or technology becoming obsolete. And then you really have to look at the economics of what it looks like to repower. Sometimes the repower cost might eat up all of the returns. So you go in and repower an entire site. Ideally, if you have perfect performance the rest of the way, you might break even. But we all know on the O&M side, there's a high likelihood that you will not have ideal performance, meaning you will not get that return back in a timely manner. So, and lastly, obviously the thing that has to be considered here is OEMs going out of business. There have been a few in the solar industry that have come and gone. And since then, some of those OEMs, some of those inverters are actually still out there operating today, even with that business gone. So looking at risk, being part of a much larger utility that's very risk adverse, it's one of those things that, we take into account and are continuously talking about and evaluating as the business grows. And then part of that, for the OEMs that do stay in business, there are extended warranty options. Once again, this is something that you really have to kind of balance the price, the terms, and what you're seeing at your sites. I'm one of those that firmly believes, one of my first slides that talked about training, I firmly believe that if you have a solid training plan, you get solid technicians and teams on the ground that can maintain this equipment properly, and great work management practices, essentially, by the time the warranty period is up, your team should be able to hopefully repair, diagnose, and get these inverters back online without leaning on the OEM. And part of that is the part strategy as well, having the parts on hand, having the training and expertise, and then once the warranty is gone, you can keep your costs low and not have to invest in these extended warranty options if you've got that training and competency. So that's, lastly, something to consider there for the overall operations of the site. So just want to take some time. I know I spoke very quickly, wanted to cover a lot of things, but I want to thank all you guys for your time, for joining, and then I'll turn it over to the host.
Wonderful. That was great. Thank you very much, Josh. Thank you, both of you. I really thought those presentations were very engaging, and we are getting a lot of engagement from the audience as well. So I think we're just in time for Q&A. We're going to cover some of those questions. And if any of your questions don't get covered, the panelists have agreed for you to get in touch with them directly. You will get this recording afterwards, and also the means to get in touch with them will be included. But we will try to cover as much as possible now. So I would like to start with a question to both of you, both Josh and Rob. What do you think is the most major challenge facing operations and maintenance teams, specifically in regards to maintenance?
Well, I can go ahead and take that one if you want.
Sure. Go first.
Okay. Yeah, I think some of the big issues I see are useful alarms from the monitoring system. Right now, we get a lot, and I mean a lot, of false positives, and just a way to manage it, because if I pay attention to all the alarms, I would have to work 16 hours a day just handling those. So right now you get a lot of false positives and you get a lot of repeat alarms for something that's already been addressed, shows up, and is in your case management system. The other thing I see is not designed for reliability. Salespeople are motivated to get the lowest cost installation, and so are customers. However, this a lot of times results in just more costly maintenance. So that's a big problem. So we need to get the incentives aligned with salespeople, customers, and long-term solutions for the systems.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that last one. I think the biggest challenge is obviously with aging assets, just the rapid pace of the change in technology, coupled with what Rob just mentioned, the built and sold for 25 years. However, the equipment that's used or some of the design factors aren't really geared towards that, and there are some heavy O&M challenges to repair or get the site to actually trend towards that long-term operation.
Yeah, this is true, and that's actually a very interesting point. Technology is obviously evolving very quickly, which makes the industry grow really fast. But Josh, do you think the financial models that are being updated are growing as quickly as the industry? So, are the lessons are these lessons learned being implemented from the older sites, especially regarding investment returns?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think really what happens is just the sheer speed of the industry right now. I think O&M models are lagging quite a bit behind the deals that are being done. So, essentially some of the pace of the deals does not allow for these models to get updated accordingly. The other thing is a lot of companies are struggling to get sufficient data on those, exact costs for very specific sites because, each site is very unique and each site might have unique issues. There's plenty of sites that have no issues, no very low maintenance, very low cost. And then you have other sites where, the costs pile up very quickly, whether on the vegetation side, on the erosion side, on the inverter downtime, or structure maintenance side. And so I think really the struggle there is nailing down what the true cost is for O&M and updating those models to reflect those true costs. That way, the long-term investment is truly protected and much more accurate. And so I think it's really purely the pace of the industry that makes it difficult. I think there are some companies, that are really dialing in on this and trying to identify how do we isolate this modeling issue and make sure that we are getting the return for investment. And for us, that's paramount right now with our growth plans and with Duke Energy being a large utility and wanting to satisfy our shareholders, making sure that we're taking that into account and not committing to something that we can't execute on.
Yeah, I think that's very, very valid. And of course, if it all fits in line with what is budgeted, that should ideally work really well. We do know though that there are a lot of unplanned maintenance costs. So actually, my next question is going to be for you, Rob. Would you like to tell us about some of the things you would suggest to perhaps lower unplanned maintenance costs?
Yes, I mentioned a few things in the presentation on how to avoid some service calls, and of course always do that, but I think there's some really, really small things you can do that make a big difference, and one of them in my experience that has been just incredibly huge on avoiding secondary truck rolls is when the technician gets to the site, have them call you, look up all the cases, make sure that there's no miscommunication on what they're going to be doing, and even more importantly, before they leave, have them call in and check the monitoring and make sure that there were no fuse holders left open, disconnects left open, breakers left open, maybe modem resets, things like that. There's a lot of these things that may take 5 minutes to fix while the technician's still on site, but another truck roll, maybe an hour of drive time, an hour of getting up, getting into the site or getting on the roof. And it can really add up, and just a simple phone call or text message can really manage this and minimize a lot of these. I think another part is, like I mentioned before, is having a good case management system. I think that's crucial because after you get hundreds of sites in your portfolio that you're managing, and who knows how many cases may be open on them. There's no way anybody can remember all that and all the details of it. So if you have a good system that explains what happened last time somebody's out there, what still needs to be fixed, next time there's a technician on site and they call in, you can tell them exactly what's going on and you can answer all their questions. So they have a much better chance of fixing what's wrong right there the first time and close the cases out. I think I also mentioned building relationships with your contractors, and I think what Josh said is very true. Training, if you have your own in-house people doing the repair work, be fair, be tough, and manage expectations. I think those are all totally true. People like to be treated fairly, and you have to be tough, though, so that you're not taken advantage of. And I think with that, everybody comes out ahead, and it's worked well for us. And then lastly, I've seen a huge difference. If you send a technician out and say, you know, we're losing 10% production, go find the problem, your chances of getting it fixed on the first truck roll drop quite a bit. Whereas if you call them and say, hey, I think we've got a metering problem, I think we have a CT problem, I think we have an inverter problem, and tell them where to go look first, and give them enough details that they can really zone in on the part of the site that needs work. And I think all those things can really help you a lot, and keep your costs down.
Wonderful. I think, yeah, that's very, very useful, and hopefully applicable for a lot of the people joining us as well. I actually have some really, really interesting questions coming quite rapidly. You guys are moving fast. This one is a little bit different than what we've discussed so far, but I think, considering that it's come up quite a few times in different manners, I should definitely ask it. It's a very interesting topic. Maybe Josh, you can start, and then Rob, you can give us your view straight after. So could you tell us a little bit about artificial intelligence used for O&M predictive maintenance? And what are you actually looking to achieve by using these systems?
All right. Yeah, that's a great question, especially since AI is, not just in the solar industry. It's, kind of a hot topic everywhere. Really what we're looking for there is, if you have a solid, maintenance management system coupled with data analytics, what you're looking for there is developing tools that will predict based on historicals or different trending set points. So a good example that I can think of right off the top of my head is if we've got data analytics and we can set baselines for cooling units on inverters and check those trends, we could set baselines saying, hey, as this trends downward, we know if it gets past a certain point, we will have a failure. So instead of having that failure and having higher repair costs, what we could do is set up an alert or an alarm that essentially triggers a technician prior to failure based on those trends. And so a lot of that has to do with robust data analytics, feeding that tool, and setting up what those baselines or what those trending alerts or analysis is. The second one is the maintenance management system. So, I showed some of the pictures of our drone and our drone program. What we're utilizing there is essentially we fly over these sites with the drones, and then we upload all the IR images into a drone analytics tool. And what that drone analytics tool does is it automatically identifies where those hotspots are on the site. And then what we do is with our performance engineering team and our solar operations team, we go in and validate those results. And what we're doing is we're training that model to get better and better at identifying what is a fault and what is not a fault, and what is a string level fault versus a panel or a cell level fault. And so as that data comes in, we train the model, the artificial intelligence gets smarter and smarter, gets more and more accurate, and over the long term of these sites, we spend less and less time manually analyzing this data and really just putting these alerts into actionable work orders to where technicians can go out and address the issue ahead of time and more efficiently, more effectively. So really that's where we're headed with AI. That's where we see it as far as, just predictive maintenance.
Wonderful. Rob, would you also like to give us some views in relation to this?
Yes, yeah, I agree with everything that Josh said there. I think it's the way things are going, and I think it's going to have to go that way because the number of systems that are being deployed is just growing and growing. They're getting bigger, and so there's more parts to fail, more issues to deal with, and it's just generally getting more complicated. I have a coworker that says you get good at looking at, he calls them squiggly lines. If you start looking at the monitoring data, you start seeing patterns, and if you spend very much time on it, you can start to identify issues by just looking at the data and looking at the graphs and the charts. However, doing this on hundreds to thousands of sites for a person to do becomes really overwhelming very quickly. So you need a way to use artificial intelligence to start getting this data into a manageable, useful, and actionable format. And something we've done, and we're still working on because it's very difficult, is trying to get a computer to look at it and be able to identify what I call squiggly line problems, and just find a way to narrow it down so that you're not having to spend 16 hours a day staring at charts and graphs, because nobody wants to do that. Even if you hire a new guy, he's not going to last very long because it gets boring very quickly. But if you can get a computer to start looking at the squiggly lines the same way a human does, and you can start seeing patterns. Now, it's very difficult to code, and at the beginning you get a lot of false positives, and you miss a lot of real issues. So there's going to be a transition point there, and the artificial intelligence really needs to be taught, and it's going to take a while. It's not a simple task to be able to implement this. Another part of this that's really important is you got to figure you have hundreds to thousands of sites. Each one of those sites is sending out data a good portion of every day of the year, and at 5, 10, or 15-minute interval data, sending probably thousands of data points. So this becomes a massive amount of data that's being sent into your artificial intelligence, and this is a big issue. So you have to plan for that also, making sure that you have the data storage and throughput to be able to accept all this data. And then once you get it, then you have to teach your artificial intelligence to be able to identify problems intelligently and send out notifications. And that's something I mentioned in my presentation is one of the things is, or in the questions earlier, I'm sorry, is just having useful alarms for monitoring. And artificial intelligence, I think, is the way this is going to happen, is having alarms that are meaningful, actionable, and not overwhelming in quantity. So you can just focus on the important problems and resolve them as quickly as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, both of you.
Well,
There are some comments here, regarding the actual optimization of remote monitoring costs, right? So, do you believe this is more about centralizing this kind of services or outsourcing, or do you in fact believe that it's not related to that at all, and it's actually different criteria that you have to take into account when trying to optimize these costs? Um, Josh, if you want to answer this one first, and then Rob, we can quickly hand it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, remote monitoring is obviously very important with sites spread out. A lot of these sites are unmanned, so the remote monitoring costs, the initial investment there to have a single platform, single database, single alerting platform is going to really be beneficial in the long term, right? Because if you're operating on several different platforms, you're limiting your efficiency as you grow based on the number of platforms, and with the number of platforms changing, just like inverter technology is changing, the remote monitoring space is changing a lot of different vendors, a lot of different options. And so really, on that turnover process that Rob mentioned, speccing in, a standardized monitoring for your sites. That way they can all feed the same data analytics. That way they all feed the same operations monitoring group. And as well as that AI portion that we talked about with that data flowing in and being able to actually utilize and lean on that pattern recognition and trending with AI. So, I guess to summarize it, I think the initial investment in remote monitoring cost, if you continue to scale, having a robust platform that can scale with you, the initial investment will be worth it in the efficiency that you'll gain on the operation side, in my opinion.
Great. Thank you very much. Rob, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, Josh, those are great points, and again, well thought out. I agree with you absolutely on it. It has to be scalable. If you plan on growing it all, you're going to, if you try to do everything manually and try to do it on site, it's going to be no time at all before you're overwhelmed with costs and time constraints. So I think any expense invested in the beginning for remote monitoring can save a huge number of truck rolls. It does for us, and it saves secondary and tertiary truck rolls also, because you can pre-diagnose the system ahead of time and send the right technician out with the right parts and get it fixed the first time quite often. It has to be scalable, because if you're planning on doing this manually and you're planning on growing, those are just in conflict with each other. At some point, it's going to overwhelm you and things are going to start falling through the cracks. So you have to have a system that can grow with you and that you can manage it intelligently as time goes on. One of the things that I think is really important is something Josh mentioned is, these monitoring companies, they come and go, they buy each other. There's been a lot of purchases in recent times, and you don't really know what company is going to be there, and it's very hard to predict what companies are going to make it. But if you're using a monitoring company, what happens if they go out of business tomorrow? So you want to keep in control of your data, and I think that's absolutely crucial. And one of the ways we deal with that is we do use a monitoring company, one of the main ones. However, we have the data sent to us first, we store it, and so we always have our data no matter what, and then we forward that data onto the monitoring company. And that way we stay in control of our systems, so no matter what outside forces come about with the monitoring industry, we're covered because we still have our data and we could pass it along to another company if that need ever comes up.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
All right. I can see, that still a lot of questions are coming through, and we really love seeing so much engagement from all of you guys. Some of them are really, really good. We are unfortunately running out of time, so we will have to wrap it up. May I just remind you, though, that you can contact both of the panelists directly, so they have agreed to reply to your messages as much as possible, of course. You can contact them. Their email addresses are included on their presentation. These recordings will be sent over to you. And yes, apologies in advance for those questions that we couldn't cover, but hopefully you can get in touch with the panelists directly. So having said that, I'd like to thank everybody involved, and especially Rob Morris from NG and Josh Rogers from Duke Energy, especially for making this webinar a huge success. We've had more than 1,000 of you around the world joining us, so I hope you've gained even more than what you hoped from our really great speaker lineup. Thank you guys very much. Please note, everybody, so these recordings will be sent via email. I'm repeating this because I know that people are tuning in, sometimes later. And where do we go from here? So what we know from this webinar, what we've learned is there are things that you can do to carry the quality of your operations and maintenance, even with reduced budgets. And we'll keep covering relevant stories for you at New Energy Update. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and we are always open for collaboration. So until then, thank you for tuning in, and have a beautiful day, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you.